I have been a fan of the Elder Scrolls nearly my whole life. I've dedicated thousands of hours to not just playing these games, but modding them, watching other people play them, and of course, studying their lore. But guess what? I'm young, and some would even consider me a Skybaby. As Skyrim was the first game in the series that I ever played. I was still in elementary school when it was released, and I've put more hours into it than any of the others. If you've been following my channel though, then you know that I hold Morrowind in the highest esteem, and even consider it the best role-playing experience of all time. I'm no stranger to older and clunkier games. I love The Witcher 1, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, and Fable, and many more, so after getting countless recommendations in my comments to try Daggerfall, I finally decided to give this 30-year-old game a go. I mean, how different could it be? Okay, can I actually not? Can I not hit this rat? Okay, I think I cannot hit this rat. I guess I need to start a new character. Let's try one of the pre-made classes. Okay, we're finally out of that dungeon. So you just have to fast travel everywhere. I think, yeah. I don't know, this quest loop just isn't very fun. I feel like I'm going to the same samey dungeons and just traveling back to town, all to get gold that I don't really need. Wait. No, there's no way. I like old games, I swear, I'm not a Skybaby. I love Morrowind. This can't be. Okay everyone, I must admit, I did not like Daggerfall, at least at first, at all. But after installing some mods that made the game world much more immersive, realistic, and even more challenging, I grew to enjoy it. And after a playthrough of experience, a bit more research, and more modding, I can now say that I absolutely love this game. Daggerfall, being released in 1996, is unlike any game I've ever played. From the second you install the game, this fact becomes abundantly clear as the most in-depth, long, and actually useful video game manual known to man is downloaded alongside it. Within the manual are very useful breakdowns of game mechanics, and since there's no tutorial in vanilla Daggerfall, this will become your home. What I find most cool about it though, is it does not primarily function as a textbook to refer to. The manual is also full of roleplay ideas for character builds, history lessons, and a thematic novel-style setup for the main story. Sitting down to read this thing with a cup of coffee before my first playthrough made me feel like a little boy with a rotary hat on my way to the local ice cream parlor. I was more giddy to get into this game than I've been in a very long time. The manual is the first thing that sets Daggerfall apart and is genuinely unrivaled in gaming. It is immediate proof of the love the devs had for this game and its concept. It's that palpable passion for this game's development that really gives Daggerfall its substance, whether you enjoy its gameplay or not. Back in the bright old days of 1996, video games were nerdy and unpopular at large, so outside of the popular eye and far from the sticky hands of mainstream appeal, they were free to be unique, challenging, and unapologetic. Something you just don't see nowadays. This allowed Daggerfall to be a unique and focused experience, so let's dive into this classic. First and foremost, I'll start with one of my few Skybaby complaints to get it out of the way. As I already said, vanilla Daggerfall is a bit too gamey and old-fashioned for me. I know the purists out there will hate me for saying it, but it is true. I don't enjoy fast traveling in RPGs, and this game's map is so huge that fast traveling is baked into the core gameplay loop and simply unavoidable. So in order to enjoy myself, I did have to download some mods to make it so traveling to the first main quest wouldn't take literal days of walking, holding the W key. I also took the liberty of making the travel and character feel realistic by adding some roleplay and immersion mods, which made the experience much more challenging, especially since I also never played Daggerfall before, so I was learning all of the new mechanics, vanilla and modded, at once. I don't recommend starting with these mods unless you're like me and love survival roleplay and suffering. Why am I freezing to death? I'm wearing 2 coats! I also added some utility mods to help me keep track of the main quest. And finally, I boosted the visuals with the 90s version of Dream, with the character models disabled to preserve that 90s charm. Paired with darker dungeons and environmental ambience, I was able to transform the main gameplay loop of dungeon delving from sprinting through caves into a bit more of a survival horror-like experience. My first character was Harriet Gare, a Breton crusader and vigilant of Stendar. I kept side questing to a minimum for the first playthrough and focused solely on the main story, which I have to say, narrative-wise, I was very impressed by the quality. The main story of Daggerfall is shunned by many for being confusing, repetitive, and boring. I admit it can be confusing, and it is repetitive, but in my opinion, the story is by no means skippable or boring narratively, especially if you're a fan of the Elder Scrolls. Even if you can't get yourself to enjoy Daggerfall's gameplay, I highly recommend sitting down for one of those multi-hour long story recap videos out there, as it is enticing and enjoyable. The narrative kept me enthralled throughout its length, and the cast of characters and locations was so long and intertwined that keeping a real-life journal of notes about who people were and what I did for them was absolutely necessary. You also play as a spy in the main story, so having to keep notes and remember connections made me feel very in character. The drawback, though, and my concession to those who dislike it, is the main quest is essentially a series of massive dungeons, which are all very similar with the occasional gimmick to spice things up. You also tend to just find a ton of very expensive books for some reason and become incredibly rich from selling them. I suppose everyone in the Iliac Bay is a massive nerd. All of this combined made my first playthrough, where I focused on the main quest, end up a bit bland and hard to roleplay. By the end, I was racing from dungeon to dungeon, running past enemies and loot in order to see the game's finale. Overall, I was just playing for the narrative, and thought I wouldn't ever touch Daggerfall again. I really did want to enjoy the game, though. I knew it was praised in the community to be an excellent fantasy life simulator, which is what I mod all of the later titles to be, so I knew that I was probably the reason it wasn't clicking. So I researched more and more and ended up finding a YouTube channel that shifted the way I was looking at Daggerfall. The channel is called Micah Raygun. I highly recommend checking it out. I watched some of his videos and realized that in my initial playthrough, I had broken my own rule with roleplay games, which is to actually roleplay actively and not rush quests. I downloaded some more mods to make the game even more immersive and lively, and started a new character. My full mod list is in the comments, by the way, if you'd like to check it out. For my second playthrough, I made a wood elf thief. And instead of writing my own backstory for the character, I used Daggerfall's generated backstory, which varies from character to character depending on choices made during creation. As mentioned at the start of the video, Daggerfall was developed by people who love fantasy role-playing, which is palpable in every aspect of the game. When reading some of the generated backstories other people were given, I realized that I shouldn't try to make the game what I wanted it to be, which is what modern games strive to do for the player, and what we're all used to. Rather, I should try to play the game the way people who passionately designed it meant for it to be played. I also set a few ground rules for this playthrough. First of all, no fast travel unless I'm bored, because fast traveling personally pulls me immediately out of character. Second, no rushing the main quests. Third, quick save only at camps while resting. Fourth, if exploring a dungeon not tied to the main quest, I only have 5 lives to complete it. If I die 5 times, I must leave the dungeon and forfeit the reward and take the negative faction reputation hit. And fifth, only do things my character would feasibly do. This approach changed everything. Daggerfall's dungeons receive a lot of criticism, most of which is completely valid. They are big, confusing, samey, challenging, and sometimes quite literally, they are impossible to finish due to the game's random generation, putting quest items in inaccessible rooms. Clearing a dungeon the way you would in any of the newer games in the series is a nightmare in Daggerfall, and part of the reason I found myself rushing to the endgame in my first playthrough. It was just no fun. You will spend entire play sessions in a single dungeon and in upwards of 20 minutes fighting through specific encounters if you play them to completion without preparation. So, I'm going to give you a mind-blowing piece of advice here. Don't finish the dungeons. Get in there, find the loot or quest item that you're looking for, and get out of there. These dungeons were developed with old-fashioned Dungeons & Dragons in mind, where the player's goal was to get loot and run, not beat a boss in the end chamber like we're all used to. So, on my second playthrough, when I started doing this, I stopped sprinting through them and started to explore them carefully. Mapping out sections at a time, I'd often be forced back to my campfire to rest and save. This transformed the experience from being arcadey and boring to feeling dangerous and transformative for my character at times. There'd be quest items in rooms with very high-level enemies, and instead of bashing my head against the wall trying to beat them, I'd let myself lose. I'd just leave it behind due to my 5-death rule. In Daggerfall, you aren't meant to do everything. The quests and dungeons aren't handcrafted and unique. Sometimes you just give up because your character would walk into a room with a lich and a werewolf and just leave because who would die for a scrap of paper for the Mages Guild? That is the beauty of these dungeons. You never know what's coming, and they sometimes force you to lose, and you must treat them with respect. In that regard, they help write your character's story. It is unique, and takes some time to get used to this, and I do prefer the newer handcrafted dungeons of modern titles overall. There is, though, something really enjoyable about these older ones that I slowly grew to love through my hatred for them. I never felt the way you do in Skyrim, where you just go. Sometimes I'd leave a dungeon crying with no loot and get on my horse and leave the entire kingdom that it was in and never look back. In Daggerfall, sometimes the dungeons beat you, not vice versa. And I've honestly never experienced that in a game before, so once I grew to respect what the dungeons were doing, I also grew to look forward to them. The primary activity you'll be participating in within Daggerfall's climactically cavernous caves is hitting other guys with a flail or burning them to death with a magical ball of fire. So, let's talk combat and utility. Daggerfall's combat system is similar to Morrowind's in that they both lend credence to tabletop gaming. Hitting an enemy visually doesn't necessarily mean you'll do damage. An invisible dice is rolled, which determines whether you landed the hit and how much damage you actually dealt. This is always very challenging to deal with for newer players, which is understandable. Once you get used to it though, this combat will become very enjoyable, just give it some time and patience. With this style of combat, some of the difficulty is always left to chance, meaning that even a skilled player can encounter situations that they didn't ever expect to have to deal with. I really don't have much to say about this other than I like it, so what I can talk about is weapons and their skills. Again, like Morrowind, Daggerfall is full of weapons, skills, and spells lost in the newest additions to the series. Playing with these lesser-seen weapons and spells is very fun, so I always opt to play with them when I can, so I started with a Paladin class for my first playthrough. Heavy armor, flail, and magic was very fun and in character for Vigilant of Stendarr. My second playthrough though, I leaned into the opposite end of things. I went with archery, stealth, and other thief-related skills like climbing, dodging, and pickpocketing. This character was some of the most fun I've had in an RPG in a very long time. To illustrate this, I'll tell an emergent story I experienced while playing. Being on my way to a new province to the west, I realized that I may be able to get away with some criminal mischief without consequence. So I staked out a few houses during the day and found a particularly rich family to rob. Knowing the guards would lock the town gates at night, I left my horse and wagon outside the city walls before heading back in and waiting until nightfall. I broke into the house and robbed it of most of its goods before being detected. Guards immediately rushed in to stop me, but I managed to use my high speed attribute to escape. Bounding to the city wall with the guards on my tail, I was shrouded by the darkness of night. I scaled the wall with my high climbing skill and rappelled down the exterior. I mounted my horse and made off with the loot while the guards were still stuck inside the locked gates of the city. Due to the interesting skills, magic, and attribute systems in Daggerfall, thousands of unique and similar stories can be had while playing. They really make this game fun to experiment with and plan certain strategies like the one I just mentioned. Daggerfall is a big game. Not just when it comes to what you can do, but it is actually huge. The game takes place in the Iliac Bay, being half High Rock and half Hammerfell. Its landmass is bigger than any other video game to this day. The map is full of thousands of towns that, while numerous, pretty much behave identically. The game's core gameplay loop is traveling to a city, finding quests or guilds, embarking on quests to dungeons and collecting loot and rewards, then returning to town to sell loot, buy new gear, and move on to a new town or rinse and repeat where you are. Similarly to the dungeons, you have to train yourself out of what we're used to with modern video game cities. In vanilla, the towns of Daggerfall have crazy layouts, duplicate buildings, and nothing to do at times. Certain mods out there like Beautiful Cities, Windmills of Daggerfall, and others do overhaul them though to make them a bit nicer to navigate and look at. But overall, still, they're kind of just building splat for you to do what you need to do before moving on. The guild quests are also meh, and a lot of the items to purchase are cheap compared to the amount of gold you get from questing, so the cities felt a bit redundant to me in my first playthrough. In my second though, I started to treat them like my character would. Stopping in taverns to grab a drink, staying up late to rob jewelry stores, buying more travel equipment for the road, so on. And just like that, similarly to the dungeons, I realized what the cities were trying to be in essence. In Skyrim, for example, the towns are almost painted for the player. There's always a unique scripted experience the first time you enter them.
Lovely on my sister.
And they act as canvases of activities for you to explore and enjoy. Daggerfall's towns, on the other hand, do you no favors. You are simply a stranger there, and everyone doesn't like you, and you don't know where anything is. You won't find any unique guilds and history in them like you do in modern titles. Instead, you find a blank slate, where it is up to you to continue writing your character's story. Stopping in a city and finding a Thieves Guild hall feels rewarding in this sense. You can try out a few quests and maybe get chased out by the guards, never to return. Or you can stay a few nights scoping out rich houses to rob before moving on. Or maybe there's a dungeon nearby, so you rent a room at the local tavern for a week and treat the village as a home base while traveling back and forth from exploring one of the game's labyrinths. Like everything else in this title, the enjoyment comes from slowing down and letting the game write a story for you. That repeating lesson throughout this video is my biggest takeaway from playing this relic of a game. It is the reason why Daggerfall is still enjoyable all these years later, and why the fanbase and modding scene is still active after all this time. Daggerfall was made for a very specific kind of person. An absolute nerd who loves make-believe stories, and as that kind of person, I can recognize that while the gameplay of Daggerfall isn't the most enticing, the game itself offers a fantastic experience, and it is one of my favorite games out there. The modern gaming market can't afford a flop. Studios are massive and expensive, and we also live in an era where people can make entire livelihoods and become rich out of trashing bad or even misunderstood games on YouTube. Due to this, there isn't much daring I suppose, in the market anymore, especially at the AAA tier. Games need to be carbon copies of each other in order to succeed because the majority of the market and money comes from people who wouldn't dedicate 20 hours to researching and modding Daggerfall just to make it more fun, for example. Most people just want to sit down and enjoy a casual experience, which I'm in no way insulting. Even I like to enjoy games like that sometimes. I suppose what I'm getting at here, though, is that Daggerfall is a uniquely challenging experience. Not just to be good at the game, but also to even understand its concepts and to master it. Every inch of ground taken and every lesson learned while playing feels rewarding, personal, and impactful. It's an experience that I have never gotten from a game before, and probably will never get from another. I wish I could say that more often. For that reason, I highly recommend Daggerfall. Brew up some coffee or tea, sit down, read the manual, binge watch some videos, and dive into old forums and give it a try. You might delete the first few characters you make, but in the end, I'd be surprised if you don't fall in love with its charm and truly open world of possibility. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've been Sir Schmib, and I hope you have a beautiful day. Until next time.